The elevator doors opened on the 38th floor, and the first thing Harriet Blackwood noticed was the boy. He couldn't have been older than 7, standing in the lobby beside a man in a worn flannel jacket, fingers wrapped tight around a small plastic dinosaur like it was the only solid thing in the room. The man had dark circles under his eyes and the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from exhaustion so deep it had settled into the bones. He'd been there when Harriet arrived at 7 that morning. It was now past 9. She almost stopped. Almost. Her assistant, Colette, appeared at her elbow. "He's been asking for you since we opened. Front desk says he won't give a name. Just keep saying he needs to speak with whoever runs Northgate Capital now." Harriet glanced down once more. The boy looked up, caught her eye, and gave a small, serious nod, the way children do when they're trying very hard to seem brave. "Tell security to handle it politely," Harriet said, "and remind Lawrence I need the Caldwell projections before 10. She didn't look back as she walked toward the boardroom. Didn't see the way the man's jaw worked when 2 security guards stepped forward. Didn't hear the boy ask, in a voice that carried further than it should have, "Dad, are we in trouble?" The boardroom at Northgate Capital smelled like fresh coffee and quiet power. 6 chairs around a glass table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Toronto, and across from Harriet sat the 2 men who'd been running this firm while she'd been running it with them. Grant Hollis, Chief Operating Officer, poured himself coffee without being asked. 15 years at Northgate, silver-templed, the kind of man who treated every meeting like a chess match he'd already won. Beside him, Felix Drummond, CFO, scrolled through something on his laptop, glasses low on his nose, barely acknowledging her arrival. "You look tired," Grant said. It wasn't concern. "I'm fine." Harriet set her portfolio down. "Let's talk about the Meridian acquisition. I've been reviewing the due diligence files, and I want to push the vote by 2 weeks." Grant's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "We've reviewed those files 3 times. The board is ready. The board is ready to sign off on a deal that writes off every community lending program Northgate has run for the past decade. I'm not." Felix looked up for the first time. "Those programs operate at a loss. They operate at a purpose," Harriet said. "There's a difference. That distinction doesn't show up on a balance sheet. It shows up in places you're not measuring." She opened her portfolio and laid out a single page. "Here. Retention rates in underserved markets where we've maintained community partnerships, 41% higher than our competitors. Brand trust surveys, regulatory goodwill. These programs aren't charity, Felix. They're strategy." Grant leaned forward. "Harriet." He used that tone, the one that sounded reasonable and wasn't. "You were hired to modernize this firm, to make it competitive. Clinging to programs that made sense 15 years ago isn't modernization. Northgate was founded on the principle that capital should serve communities, not just extract from them. That's not sentiment. That's the mandate. The founder's been gone for 4 years. Harriet opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed on the table. A text from the front desk. She glanced at it. Situation escalating in lobby. Security requesting guidance. She stood. "Hold the vote." Grant spread his hands. "Harriet," I said, "hold it." She took the elevator down, expecting a dispute over parking validation. What she found was the quiet collapse of someone trying very hard not to break in public. The man in the flannel jacket was standing with his back against the reception desk, the boy pressed against his leg. 2 security guards flanked them, professionally distant, politely immovable. A cluster of junior analysts had gathered near the coffee station, phones just barely visible. The receptionist, an older woman named Bet, who'd been at Northgate since before Harriet joined, was standing with her arms crossed between the guards and the man, her expression the particular one of someone who knows she's not supposed to get involved and has decided to get involved anyway. "Sir," one of the guards was saying, "we've asked you 3 times. If you don't have an appointment, I know I don't have an appointment." The man's voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of control that takes real effort. "I'm not trying to cause a problem. I just need 5 minutes with someone who actually makes decisions here, Dad." The boy looked up. "Dad, let's just go." "Not yet, bud." Harriet walked across the lobby. The analysts scattered back to their desks. The guards straightened. "I'm Harriet Blackwood," she said. "I'm the CEO. You wanted to speak with someone in charge?" The man looked at her. Up close, he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe early 40s, though he wore the age hard. His jacket was clean but thin for October in Toronto. His eyes were steady. "Yes," he said, "I do." Before he could continue, the elevator opened behind her, and Grant walked out, Felix a step behind. She hadn't invited them. "Oh, for God's sake." Felix stopped, looked the man over the way he looked at line items he intended to cut. "You came down here for this?" "Felix." Harriet's voice was warning. "He's been standing in our lobby for 2 hours. He doesn't have an appointment, he won't give a name, and you're treating it like a board matter. Felix walked closer, and there was something performative about it, like he wanted an audience. What's your angle, friend? Job application? Investment pitch? You heard Northgate was doing well and figured you'd walk in off the street? I figured I'd come back and see what you'd done with the place, the man said. Something in his voice made Harriet go still. Felix laughed. Right, come back. Very dramatic. Stop. Harriet stepped between them. Felix, go back upstairs. We have a board meeting. I'm aware of that. Go. Felix looked at Grant. Grant looked at the man in the flannel jacket for one long moment, something passing across his face that Harriet couldn't read. Then he nodded at Felix, and they both turned and walked back to the elevator. The boy had pressed his face into his father's side. He wasn't crying. He was just very, very small. Harriet looked at the man. Conference room 4, down the hall, first left. I'll meet you there in 2 minutes. He nodded. He took the boy's hand and they walked, and something in the way he moved through the building, not lost, not looking for signs, made the back of her neck prickle. Conference room 4 was a plain space, no windows, used mostly for contract signings and difficult conversations. Harriet sat across from the man and the boy. The boy immediately pulled a small sketchbook from his backpack and started drawing, which struck her as the habit of a child who'd spent a lot of time in waiting rooms. You have 2 minutes, she said. Make them count. Your CO is negotiating a side agreement with Meridian Financial that isn't in the acquisition documents you've been shown. The man set a USB drive on the table. He and your CFO have been directing fee income from 3 institutional accounts into a holding company they control. Over 3 years, it totals just under $38 million. The acquisition is structured to bury the discrepancy before any independent audit can flag it. Harriet looked at the drive, then at him. That's a serious allegation. It's a documented one. Where did you get this? From someone inside the firm who couldn't stay silent anymore. Who? That's not something I'm prepared to share right now. She leaned back. You still haven't told me who you are. No, he said. I haven't. Why not? The man looked at the boy, who was drawing what appeared to be a very detailed triceratops. Then he looked back at her. Because I wanted to see the firm first. See what kind of leadership it had. Whether it was worth saving before I said anything that couldn't be unsaid. Harriet studied him. There was something about the way he spoke, the vocabulary he used, the specific details he'd cited, that didn't fit the picture Grant and Felix had tried to paint. This wasn't someone who'd wandered in off the street. What's your name? She asked again. He was quiet for a moment. Then, it doesn't matter yet. What matters is what's on that drive. Look at it tonight. Alone. Don't mention it to Hollis or Drummond, not until you've seen it. The boy looked up. Dad, I finished the dinosaur. Can I show her? Sure, bud. He held up the sketchbook. It was genuinely a very good triceratops. That's excellent, Harriet said, and meant it. The boy smiled and went back to drawing. She looked at the drive again. Small, black, anonymous. The kind of thing that could be nothing or could be everything. If this is fabricated, it isn't. If it is, I'll know within 24 hours, and I'll pursue every legal remedy available to me. If it were fabricated, I wouldn't be sitting in a conference room in a jacket I bought at Value Village, Ms. Blackwood. I'd have sent a lawyer. She took the drive. That night, she worked alone in her office until 2 in the morning. The files were meticulous. Bank transfers, internal emails, shell company registrations in the Cayman Islands and Delaware, contract amendments that had been processed through Felix's department without appearing in any board summary she'd ever received. She found the moment it had started, a small redirect, 3 years ago, right after the previous CEO retired and left a governance gap that lasted 6 months. Grant had filled that gap quietly, expanded his authority incrementally, and by the time Harriet was brought in as CEO, the structure he'd built was already invisible to her because it had been built before her. She threw up once in the private bathroom off her office. Then she went back to the files. At 3 in the morning, she called the board chairman, a man named Philip Osey, who was 70 years old and had been with Northgate since it was a 4-person shop operating out of a converted warehouse in the annex. Philip, she said when he answered on the second ring, fully awake as though he'd been waiting. I need to tell you something. She talked for 40 minutes, sent him files. Listened to his silence grow heavier. Finally, he said, Who gave you this? She described the man, the flannel jacket, the boy with the sketchbook. Philip was quiet for a long time, then softly, Oh, he came back. Philip, Harriet, I want you to do nothing until I'm there. Don't confront Grant. Don't call Felix. Don't tell anyone. We have a board vote in less than 60 hours. I know, I'm going to call some people. And Harriet. He paused. The man who came to see you, the one with the boy. Yes, his name is Owen Calloway. The name landed like something dropped from a height. She actually stood up from her chair. Owen Calloway. co-founder of Northgate Capital, the man who'd built the community lending framework that was now being gutted, who'd disappeared from the firm 4 years ago after his wife died in a car accident on the 401, leaving him with a 6-year-old son and what his official departure letter had called a need to step back from professional life for personal reasons. The man whose name was still on the original founding documents, whose shares had never been transferred. "That's not possible," she said. "He called me 6 months ago. He'd been watching from a distance, heard through a mutual contact that something was wrong. I asked him to wait while I looked into it myself, but the merger was the line. When he heard about the Meridian deal, he stopped waiting. Why didn't he just call the board? Why walk in like that without—" "Because he wanted to see what it had become," Philip said. "And because, if I had to guess, he needed to know whether the person running his firm was someone worth trusting with the truth." Harriet stood at her window, looking at the city. Somewhere out there, a single father had put his son to bed and was probably lying awake, wondering if he'd made the right call. "Philip," she said, "what do I do?" "You already know what to do. You've known since you opened those files." She did. She also knew it was going to cost her. She sent the email to the full board at 4:17 in the morning. Not a carefully worded preliminary note. A full disclosure. What she'd found, what she believed it meant, and what she was formally requesting. An emergency suspension of the Meridian vote pending an independent audit. By 5:30, her phone was ringing. Patricia Huang called first, a board member who served on 3 other corporate boards and had the particular skill of asking devastating questions in a very pleasant voice. "Harriet, walk me through your reasoning. I just sent you 46 pages of it. I've read them. I want to hear your voice." Harriet talked for 20 minutes. At the end, Patricia said, "Grant's going to say the evidence is planted. I know. He's going to say you panicked, that you're inexperienced and someone manipulated you. He can say whatever he wants. The wire transfers don't lie. He has allies on the board. 2 of them, maybe 3. Then we'll need the others." Harriet looked at the city going pale with early light. "Patricia, are you with me?" A pause. Then, "Get me the full audit trail and I will be." By 7:30, Harriet had sent everything. By 8, she had confirmation from Philip that he was driving in from Oakville. By 8:45, she was standing in her lobby again because Bet had texted her to say that Owen Calloway was back, and he'd brought his son, and could she please come down. He was sitting in the same chair as the day before, though he looked more rested today. More decided. Jasper Harriet had looked him up, found a single mention of the boy's name in an old firm newsletter from years ago, was already drawing a new page, what looked like a very ambitious castle. "You saw the files," Owen said when she sat across from him. "I saw the files, and it's worse than you described." She kept her voice level. 38 million is the number I can confirm right now. With a full audit, I think it'll be higher." Owen nodded. His hands were still on the table. Steady. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. "For yesterday, for letting it go as far as it did in the lobby before I came down." She stopped. "You sat there for 2 hours. I've waited longer for harder things. That's not an excuse. You walked into your own firm and we treated you like a problem to be removed." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. "You stopped it. I let it start, yes," he said, "but you stopped it, and you read the files, and you sent that email before sunrise when you could have waited and let the merger go through and told yourself you didn't know." He looked at her steadily. "A lot of people in your position would have done that. I'm not a lot of people." "No," he said. "I'm starting to understand that." Jasper held up his sketchbook. The castle now had a flag on top and what appeared to be a moat filled with dinosaurs. "Do you have any good markers?" he asked Harriet. "Mine are running out." She sent Colette to find markers. It felt like the most important administrative task she'd handled in weeks. The board meeting that afternoon was the longest 3 hours of Harriet's professional life. Owen walked in with Philip, who'd arrived from Oakville just after noon. Grant looked at Owen the way you look at something you thought you'd buried. Felix went pale and stayed that way. Patricia had delivered. 6 board members were present who understood what they were voting on and why. 2 others, both with long-standing ties to Grant's professional network, looked uncomfortable and didn't quite meet anyone's eyes. "I want to address the allegation directly," Grant said before anyone else had spoken. He was good. Harriet had always known he was good at this. Owen Calloway walked away from this firm 4 years ago. He left voluntarily, signed a transition agreement, and has had no operational involvement since. "Whatever documents he's produced can be verified independently," Philip said. "Which is what we're going to do." Philip, with respect. "Grant." Philip set both hands on the table. He was 70 years old and had the particular authority of someone who had outlasted a great many people who'd underestimated him. "I've been on this board for 22 years. I hired you. I trusted you. And I am sitting here looking at bank records that show $38 million leaving this firm through accounts you approved. His voice didn't waver. Do not tell me about respect. The room went quiet. Owen laid the documentation on the table, not dramatically, just methodically, the way you do something you've been preparing for a long time. Wire transfers, email chains, a contract amendment that Felix had processed last November redirecting fee income into a holding company called Graywood Advisory, a name that appeared nowhere in any public filing and everywhere in the private ones. Felix broke first, not with a confession. With a deflection so poorly timed and obviously self-serving that it functioned as one anyway. He turned to Grant and said, "You told me the Graywood transfers were a legitimate tax structure. You said compliance had reviewed them." Grant said very quietly, "Felix, I'm not." Felix's voice cracked. "I am not taking the fall for this alone." Grant looked at him the way a chess player looks at a piece he's decided to sacrifice. The vote to suspend the Meridian acquisition was 7-2. The vote to place Grant and Felix on immediate administrative leave, pending investigation, was 8-1. The one abstention came from a board member who left the room immediately afterward and didn't return Harriet's calls for 2 weeks. After it was over, after the security escorts and the formal paperwork, and the press statement that Philip drafted with the calm efficiency of someone who had survived several corporate scandals. Before this one, Harriet found Owen in the hall outside the boardroom. Jasper was asleep on a chair beside him, the sketchbook open on his lap, a half-finished drawing of something that might have been a rocket ship or a very modern cathedral. "How is he?" she asked. "He fell asleep about an hour in. Kid can sleep anywhere. He gets it from his mother." Owen's voice was soft on the last part. "Not broken, just careful, the way you handle something still tender." "What happens now?" Harriet asked. "For the firm, you tell me. You're the CEO. For you." He looked at his son. "We go home. Jasper's got hockey practice on Saturday, and I promised him I'd finally learn to skate if he would." A small smile. "I'm going to regret that. Are you going to come back? To the board, at least?" "I'll stay involved. Not as a daily presence, but I'll hold my shares and make sure they mean something." He glanced at her. "You don't need me in a chair at the table. You need someone who'll pick up the phone when you're not sure whether you're being paranoid or whether something's actually wrong." "That would be useful," she admitted. "I have a talent for it, apparently." Philip appeared from down the hall, moving slowly, leaning on the cane he'd had for 2 years and always seemed slightly annoyed about. "The press is gathering downstairs. We should say something before someone else does." "I'll handle it," Harriet said. "Both of you should," Philip said, and walked back toward the elevator. Owen looked at her. "You don't have to. You built this firm. People should know that." She looked at Jasper. "We'll keep it short. You won't have to answer questions about him." Owen was quiet. Then he nodded. They stood together in front of about 40 reporters in the lobby. Philip to one side, Jasper tucked into a chair near Bet's desk with a cup of hot chocolate and his sketchbook. Bet had found him a set of Crayola markers, the thick kind, and she looked mildly triumphant about it. Harriet spoke first, clear, direct, what had been discovered, what the board had decided, what Northgate Capital would do next, full external audit, independent governance review, reinstatement of the community lending programs that had been quietly wound down over the past 2 years. Then Owen stepped to the microphone. He wasn't polished. He didn't have talking points. He just spoke. "My wife and I started this firm because we believed that capital should go where it's needed most, not just where it's easiest to extract the most from. That's not a new idea. Every firm says something like that. The question is whether you mean it when it becomes inconvenient." He paused. "I stepped away 4 years ago. I had a personal reason that I don't intend to discuss in public. What I can tell you is that stepping away doesn't mean giving up, and coming back doesn't mean the people who held the line in my absence did it wrong. It means they did it right long enough for someone to notice and come home." A reporter called out, "Are you returning as CEO?" "No. My son starts his school science fair next month, and I've already promised to help him build a working volcano." Priorities. A few people laughed, the kind that release pressure. "Miss Blackwood runs this firm. I'm here to make sure it stays worth running." The questions that followed were aggressive, detailed, and mostly directed at Harriet, which was appropriate. She answered the ones she could, and promised answers on the ones she couldn't. Afterward, standing in the lobby while the cameras packed up and reporters filed out, Jasper wandered over and tugged on Owen's sleeve. "Did it go okay?" "Yeah, bud. It went okay. Can we get shawarma?" "Absolutely." He looked at Harriet. "Do you want to come?" "You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday." She hadn't. "I have calls," she said. "You have calls tomorrow. Tonight you have shawarma." She went. They sat in a small place on King Street, just the three of them, and Jasper explained at length, and with great authority, why the Triceratops was superior to all other dinosaurs, which Owen disputed firmly in favor of the Ankylosaurus, which led to a debate that lasted through dinner and reached no resolution. Harriet listened and thought about the email that had been sitting in her drafts for 6 months. The one she'd almost sent to the board, raising questions about the community program closures, then talked herself out of because Grant had said everything was under review, because she'd told herself she needed more time, more data, more certainty. She should have sent it sooner. She should have come down to the lobby sooner. She would not make either of those mistakes again. The weeks that followed were brutal in the particular way of institutions relearning their own rules. The external auditors confirmed 41 million, not 38. Grant resigned before he could be formally removed and retained lawyers immediately. Felix cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge agreement that nobody was entirely happy with, which Philip said usually meant it was fair. 3 board members who'd been too comfortable with Grant's arrangements chose not to seek renewal. 2 new members joined, both with backgrounds in ethical governance frameworks, both under 50, both genuinely curious about the community programs in a way that felt earned rather than performed. Harriet cut her own compensation by 1/3 and tied executive bonuses to impact metrics for the first time in the firm's history. She hired a deputy CEO from outside the firm, a woman named Constance who'd spent a decade at a credit union in Halifax and had the kind of operational precision that made Harriet trust her instantly. She also called Sarah Mbeki, who ran the Bramford Community Development Fund in Scarborough, one of Northgate's oldest community lending partners, to tell her that the partnership was being renewed and expanded. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have to tell you, we'd already started talking to our staff about what we'd have to cut. We have 32 families right now in transitional housing because we had the capital to support them. If the partnership had ended, it didn't," Harriet said. "No, it didn't." Sarah's voice was steady. "Thank you, Ms. Blackwood." Harriet forwarded the call summary to Owen that evening with a single line. "This is what we were protecting." He wrote back within minutes, "I know. How are you holding up?" She thought about the question honestly before she answered. She was tired. The stock had dipped and hadn't fully recovered. 2 long-standing institutional clients had quietly moved portfolios elsewhere, spooked by the scandal, and she'd spent a significant portion of the past 3 weeks in conversations designed to hold the remaining ones. She was running on structured sleep and a lot of very good coffee from the place on Adelaide. But she was also, for the first time since she'd taken the CEO role, doing exactly what she'd thought she was taking the job to do. "Better than I expected," she wrote back. "Ask me again in 6 months." "Fair enough," he replied. "Jasper wants you to know the volcano worked. We only ruined 1 kitchen towel." She laughed at her desk, alone at 9:30 on a Tuesday, and it felt like something she hadn't done in months. The governance review took 12 weeks. The audit closed after 14. Grant's legal proceedings dragged on as they do, and would continue to for another year at least. Justice at that scale was never clean or fast, and Harriet had stopped expecting it to be. What she focused on instead was the work. Program by program, relationship by relationship, decision by decision, making the firm worth what it had been built to be. Philip retired properly 6 months later, though he called her every few weeks to ask pointed questions and offer opinions she hadn't solicited and that were almost always right. She told him that once, and he said, "I know," and she laughed. Owen came in occasionally. Not on a schedule, not for any formal role, just when something came up that seemed to call for someone who remembered what the original vision had looked like when it was still new. He would sit across from her in her office, sometimes with Jasper doing homework at the corner table, and they would talk through problems, the way 2 people talk through problems when they both care about the outcome and neither one has anything to prove. Jasper brought her one of his drawings eventually. A sketchbook page, carefully torn out, a crayon rendering of a building with the words Northgate Capital written in large, slightly uneven letters above the door. Outside the building were 2 stick figures, one tall and one shorter. Both of them were smiling. "That's you and Dad," he told her seriously. "I put you both outside because that's where the important conversations happen." She framed it and put it on her wall, not in a corner, not behind the door, right across from her desk, where she could see it every time she looked up. Because he wasn't wrong. The conversations that had mattered most in those months had not happened in boardrooms or on conference calls or in carefully worded press releases. They'd happened in a lobby, in a conference room with dinosaur drawings and borrowed markers, in a shawarma place on King Street at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. They'd happened between people who decided to tell the truth, even when it was expensive, even when it would have been so much easier not to. And that, she thought, looking at the drawing, was the only kind of capital that actually compounded.